We are ready to begin our judges training for you. Welcome to the 2018 Nebraska 4-H Foods webinar. My name is Amy Peterson, and along with my colleague Cami Wells, we serve as your 4-H State Fair Foods Superintendent, also with our Assistant Superintendents Kathy Burr and Kayla Henricks. We are thrilled to see so many of you here this morning, and this will also be recorded, and the link will be posted on the Judges Training website for those who can't make it and for future reference. We're really excited also to bring this training to you all this morning to go over how to judge foods at the county and state fair levels, specific food safety concerns, and all you need to know about our new 4-H foods and food preservation curriculum for our 4-Hers this year. So let's get started and see what Nebraska has cooking. 4-H food projects are so unique. When you think about all the other exhibits we have at county fairs, these are something that are commonly made the day before, brought in the hot sun in the middle of the summer to a building at the county fair, maybe 5 miles away, maybe 50 miles away, and tasted by the judge, and then we put it on display. So there's a lot going on there and a lot of things we need to be aware of. Our goals today are to help you be a winner with food safety concerns with our fair projects by understanding baked good basics, perfecting pies and pastries, creative cooking challenges with our exhibits, perfectly preserved foods, and then focusing on our 4-H fair exhibits, especially our new curriculum. So let's go ahead and talk about baked good basics. Well, it's more than just keeping fingers out of the cookie dough, and we know that's what kids think they like the best. Topping it off is always good, and it's important to know what is acceptable on top of an exhibit and understanding that icings and frostings made with raw eggs are not acceptable. You can, however, use an egg white rinse that's brushed onto like a pie before baking because that will be baked. Cream cheese and egg white frostings are not allowed, but you can make a buttercream frosting. But you cannot use fresh fruit to be used as a garnish, as you can see here on top of this cake. Frostings may also be made with like a meringue powder or powdered sugar, milk, and other types of flavorings and still be just fine. There's a lot of sugar that's in frosting. Caramel rolls and pineapple upside down cakes are also acceptable, and I think a lot of judges really enjoy tasting those too. The high sugar content of all of these frostings we mentioned won't support the bacterial growth, and so it'll be just fine. However, some things to keep in mind is not using cream cheese. So cream cheese fillings and melted cheese toppings might result in an unsafe food product by judging time, and that might be due to heat and humidity and can be disqualified. When you think about, for example, the state fair, and we bring exhibits in on Tuesdays, and it might not get judged until late Wednesday afternoon. They came from clear out at the opposite end of the state. It may have been made on Monday. And so we just really want to make sure that our food products are safe to eat for our judges and anybody else who wants to try a bite too. So all fruit that is in a baked food item must be cooked, and fresh fruit is not appropriate for any baked product due to spoilage. For example, like a fresh fruit tart. We did see one a few years ago, and although it was a very nice looking exhibit, we had to have it disqualified because of the fresh fruit that was in the product. Other things that you have to be aware of are meat, dried meat, meat substitute pieces like bacon bits and pepperoni, because these are not allowed in 4-H food exhibits. They may result in an unsafe food product by the time that item is judged because of the heat and the weather conditions, and they will be disqualified. So that also includes soy meat substitutes as well. Now I'm going to turn this over to Cami, who's going to tell us about perfecting pies and pastries.
All right, thank you so much, Amy. Excited to be here and to talk a little bit about some pies and pastries. Just looking at the slide makes me kind of hungry, so that's looking forward to fair already. All right, so we do know that pecan and walnut pies are considered safe with the traditional recipe using eggs, sugar, and that have not had added water or milk. There's not enough moisture in this type of pie to support microbial growth. These would not fit into the Cooking 401 project, and we'll talk about each of those different projects in the exhibits later, because the description on that product is a double crusted fruit pie. But this actually may be a good fit for our family food tradition exhibit, which is in Cooking 401 also. So when we look at custards and cream pies, we know that those are not acceptable fair exhibits. Bacteria can multiply quickly in those moist desserts that contain eggs and dairy products. Pies that are made with pumpkin, custard, or cream-based need to be refrigerated. All right, so as far as a pie crust that it has egg baked into the recipe, that is perfectly fine. There's not any known food safety concerns when the egg is actually baked into it. However, egg crust recipes that are washed with eggs or egg whites on the bottom crust before filling are not a good choice for a fair exhibit. The eggs are covered with a wet liquid, and it may be questionable as to whether the eggs will get fully cooked. This is different from an egg wash that is baked on top of the crust, which should be heated and baked thoroughly. So just on that bottom crust when you're adding directly filling to it. So.
And this leads us into creative cooking challenges. And this seems to be such an interesting thing because of the ways on social media that someone can post, oh, look at this great idea on how we can bake something. It's not always a great idea. Let's examine just a few of them. We've all seen Pinterest fails. And so just a reminder that online recipes have brought all kinds of challenges, and they just don't always turn out like you think it's going to turn out because of a picture. So this brings us to some unique things that you might see posted and as a result might end up as a fair exhibit. One of them can be, can you bake bread or cakes in a can or a jar? I commonly see things like this posted around Christmas time as well, but it's not considered safe to bake in a canning jar because that jar is sealed. And then during the cooling process, it creates an anaerobic environment, or there's not oxygen in there, and that could actually create a botulism risk. And these canning jars are not meant to be baked. That's not how they were made. And so you have another risk with that as well. How about baking food in bags? Another novel idea. Well, don't use brown paper bags from the grocery or other stores for cooking. They're not sanitary. They could cause a fire, emit toxic fumes from the ink that's on there, and the intense heat might cause the bag to ignite, causing a fire in the oven. So just a reminder then that the ink, glue, and recycled materials in paper bags can emit toxic fumes when they're exposed to heat. You can purchase oven cooking bags, and you would find those in a specialty type of store, but not just your run-of-the-mill brown paper bag. What about recipes with alcohol? And we don't see as much of this as we used to, but it's still very, very important to bring up. Recipes made with alcohol in them are not allowed for 4-H food project exhibits. So even though the alcohol may bake out during the food preparation, since the 4-H'er is not of legal age to purchase it or to possess it, it's not appropriate for any recipe to have alcohol in it. So a beer type of bread would not be something they could make. Or perhaps they had a recipe where they said they made their own vanilla. Well, they had to have alcohol to make the vanilla. So although that's an interesting thing that they did, it's really not appropriate for them to do that. We also have to keep this in mind for recipe files and menu plans, because believe it or not, we have actually seen recipes in recipe files that contain alcohol, and even like a drink. So that's really not anything we want to recommend. So once again, homemade vanilla extract that's made by soaking beans and liquor is still considered alcohol. How about baking in a clay pot? Well, food and food preservation exhibits should be prepared and baked in food-grade utensils and containers. So non-glazed, or those with a food-grade glazed terracotta baking pots, are safe. However, other types of pots might have a lead-based glaze and are probably labeled then for non-food use. So you can use a type of a clay pot or a pan. It just needs to be one that is meant to be for foods. How about friendship breads or sourdough starters? This is a really questionable thing, and it's really hard to find concrete yes or no about this, but friendship bread that uses a sourdough starter is made from yeast, water, flour, sugar, and milk. And as you are probably familiar, it's fed and it stands at room temperature for 10 days before being given to other people to share. And so that in itself is something that is only as good as the person who's taking care of it. So the food safety concerns with this are based on the presence of the milk and the safety of the bakery doughs in general. So you can't guarantee that who was taking care of this bread all the times before you got it was doing it correctly. So properly prepared friendship breads are considered safe because they become acidic during the fermentation process. So like I said, it's kind of questionable. The starters need to be safe and should be checked for off odors and colors when they use them. And then what's better is to use a starter recipe that's actually stored in the refrigerator and making sure that the doughs are cooked thoroughly. I really couldn't find any research that said that they found problems in them, but it can be such a gray area that it might be something to consider, finding out a little bit more about how they actually use that starter bread. How about using a paper bag to prevent baked goods from sticking to a pan? Well, the paper bag must be of food grade, and once again, the ones that you just get from your grocery store are not. You can also use parchment or wax paper and then having it cut to a little bit slightly smaller than the pan size and let it set for about 10 to 15 minutes before removing it from the pan. Then you peel off the paper and continue cooling. So it can be at an advantage when you are doing the baking. Can you use sour cream in a recipe for the fair? And it just depends on how you use it. And this is something that does need to be clear for our county staff and for our judges as well, that it can be used if it's mixed in. So sometimes you'll see a sour cream coffee cake where it's mixed in as part of the fat that's in that recipe. That is perfectly fine. And most commonly you'll see that in the creative mix type of category with a yellow food mix, yellow cake mix and sour cream and eggs and so on and so forth. But you can't have it layered in. So it has to be mixed in as part of the fat versus a layer of sour cream in the product, because that doesn't dry out in the baking process. Same thing with cream cheese. So you think of like a zebra brownie, and that is something that's not baked into the actual batter itself. It's its own layer. So if the cream cheese provides the fat in the recipe and it's part of the batter and not layered, it's fine. But if the cream cheese is layered or a filling in the product, like a cream cheese streusel or a coffee cake that is a layer, and it might have cream cheese and sugar and eggs and a little bit of flour, but that's not enough sugar in there, so it's still going to be considered something that could lead to some microbial growth. How about frosting with heavy cream? It just depends, but this would probably be considered a food safety hazard because there's not enough sugar in the recipe, and then you'd have to have this item be refrigerated. So all of these items that are refrigerated would be great for maybe a table setting contest or something where the food is, excuse me, where the food is just brought to the judge, but not for a county fair exhibit. How about filled cupcakes or baked goods? And these are really popular these days too. But cupcakes and non-fruit strudels and other baked goods filled with a cream cheese mixture need to be refrigerated after baking. Excuse me. And so they're not appropriate for county or state fair exhibits. Excuse me. Here's the one that you do need to be aware of though. Cupcake liners are allowed for 4-H exhibits. Do not lower a placing because of the use of cupcake liners. Excuse me again. I also wanted to clarify what a creative mix was. And this is a baked item that's made from a mix, and it can be any type of mix, not just a cake mix. The food product, though, has to be modified to be made in a different way. For example, would be a poppy seed quick bread made from a cake mix cookies, sweet rolls that are made from ready-made bread dough, monkey breads that are made from biscuit dough, streusel coffee cake from cake mix, those types of things. But it's not a cake. They have to do something different to it. So like this bundt cake here, they turned it into a coffee cake. So what exactly isn't a creative mix? So adding an ingredient to that does not change the basic recipe is not a creative mix. And for example, adding instant pudding mix to a cookie or a cinnamon roll recipe is meant to add flavor and it changes the texture, but it doesn't change the product. So it's perfectly fine in a regular recipe and a regular category if they add a pudding mix to it. Don't disqualify it and say that it's not a creative mix, because that's not what it is. So if you run across, for example, a sweet roll recipe that has pudding in it, that pudding is changing the flavor, and that's fine. It's still a sweet roll. It's not a creative mix. If they made the sweet rolls with frozen bread dough or another type of product, that is a creative mix. I've even seen cinnamon roll recipes that put a cake mix in it. That is a creative mix. But using instant pudding for flavor isn't. I hope that makes sense. You can ask questions at the end if you'd like to have that clarified just a little bit more. And with that, we're going to change gears and go to perfectly preserved foods.
All right, so this is Cami again, and I'm going to talk just kind of through some food preservation basics. So if you want to change the slide, Amy. Okay, there we go. So we know that food preservation has changed over time, and we want to make sure that we are following the latest and the safest recommendations. So we do know that it is important to make sure that our 4-Hers follow the most current canning principles and guidelines, and they have changed over the years. So that's pretty important to make sure we're using the latest information. A few basics next on purple ribbon rules. So that we know for our FAIR projects, we want to make sure that the USDA the processing methods are followed for all food preservation exhibits. Standard canning jars should be used. They can be any brand. I know we've had some discussion in the past. Do they have to be Ball and Kerr? No, they don't. There's a lot of big box stores and some of our dollar type stores that have their own brands of canning jars. And so we are not particular on brand. They can be any brand, same with the lids, but they do need to be canning jars. There's a lot of decorative jars out there these days also, so I want to make sure that they're labeled as canning jars. We do know that jams, jellies, preserves, marmalades, fruits, tomatoes, pickled vegetables must be processed in a boiling water bath, and we're going to talk a little more about that. Tomatoes are one that can go either way. They can be processed in a boiling water bath or a pressure canner. Just need to follow the correct instructions for either of those. And we know that all non-acid vegetables, so everything but tomatoes and meats, must be processed in a pressure canner. All right, so we do know that processing times vary with the product being canned and the size of the container. So whether it's a quart jar or a pint jar, it does make a difference on most of our products. The processing times may vary because of the altitude. So we are different altitudes across Nebraska. It's amazing how different we are from the eastern part to the western part of the state. And so we do know the higher the altitude, the longer the processing time. So we want to make sure that our 4-Hers are taking account what altitude that they produce their products. All right, so next we have a little bit about the difference between raw pack and hot pack. So raw pack is the practice of filling jars with raw unheated food. It's acceptable for canning low acid foods, but allows more rapid quality losses in higher acid foods processed in a boiling water bath canner. So we're going to talk a little more about that, but again, it's okay, but typically the quality is not as good, especially things for like fruit. And then we have our hot pack, and that's the heating of raw food in the boiling water or steam and filling it into hot jars. At first, the quality of raw and hot pack food may seem similar, but within a short storage time, the color and the flavor of our hot pack foods will be superior. So that's something to think about, how the 4-Her processed it. If you're thinking the color is not as bright, did they raw or hot pack it? And did they follow the correct instructions for either of those? And then next we have just a little bit about the different types of jars. So we know that each jar is different and may take a different amount of time to get all the contents to the right temperature. So the 4-Hers need to follow the jar size that the recipe lists. Our quart jars take longer processing times than pint jars. And 12-ounce jars, we do want to make sure that those are processed like our pint jars. So they're a little bit bigger than our jelly jars. So we want to make sure that we go up to that next higher size to make sure that they get heated thoroughly. Next, just a little bit about spices. So spices are dried spices, especially in moderation when added to low acid foods, will not affect the processing. So if they're adding a little more dried oregano or basil, that's perfectly fine. However, when we really start changing the recipes and increasing the materials like onions or peppers or those kinds of things, that's going to increase the viscosity of the food and increase the time needed to heat the food. So want to make sure that we really stick with the recipes. That's pretty important. And that's also when we talk about changing recipes, it also affects the pH or the acid level. So then on the next slide, just talks a little bit about the proper ingredients in home preserved foods and making sure that we follow the recipe to make sure that they are the right pH level. So we do know ingredients make foods a high acid or low acid distinction, must be below a pH of 4.6 to be a high acid food product. Clostridium botulinum, which is that bacteria that is pretty nasty. You do not want to get that one. It's just awful. Very, very scary. We do know that CBOT, or Clostridium botulinum, may grow and produce a toxin at levels above a pH of 4.6. So that's why we're really concerned about what type of processing we're doing and what the acid level of our food product is. So the next slide is just a few examples of our high acid foods. So you can see our fruits are generally pretty high in acid, so they don't need to be processed in a pressure canner. They can do the boiling water bath because they are a higher acid food. Also includes are the pie fillings from these ingredients, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in just a second. All right, so next we have a little bit about our processing again. So processing has to be hot enough to kill the bacteria. Boiling water baths never go higher than 212 degrees, and they may last at higher altitudes. So this will kill many bacteria, but not necessarily the one we're really concerned about, that Clostridium botulinum. High acid foods have the acidity to prevent the growth of this toxin. So again, kind of the difference of why we have to pressure can some things and why we can hot water bath other things. So next, just a little bit about mixed pH foods. So we do know some things like salsa are a mixture of our higher acid foods and our lower acid foods. And so it's so important to make sure that if following a recipe does make a difference if you're adding a little more of this and a little more onions, a little more peppers. So salsa is one that's particular that people just like to add their own thing. They like to add a little more of this, a little more of that, and start kind of really altering the recipe, which causes a problem because that's going to change the pH. So especially if they're going to process that salsa in a water bath canner, that may not have a low enough pH to make it safe. So again, always following tested recipes is so important. Next, just a little bit about low acid foods. So those are all of our meats and our vegetables. So again, they have to be processed in a pressure canner. And what that pressure canner does is it not only increases the pressure, but allows that temperature to go higher. And so that's what's going to kill that CBOT. And so that's why we have to process those things in that pressure canner. You know, especially even Pinterest, we've seen kind of a resurgence of some alternate canning methods. So open kettle canning, which is, we'll talk more about that, processing in jars and ovens, microwaves, dishwashers. I've had all of those calls probably within the past year, people seeing something on the internet and thinking, oh, this sounds good. It sounds a lot easier than doing the pressure canner. I think I'll do that. But again, it's not safe. It's not going to get a high enough temperature to kill the bacteria that may be present. All right, and then next, just a little bit about open kettle canning, and that's basically where you take the hot food, you put it into jars, you don't process it, and you put the lid on, and folks think that if it's sealed, it should be fine. But we know that the contents don't reach a high enough temperature to kill potential bacteria, and that you can contaminate things just in that process of putting the hot food into the jars. And so since there's no more heating, it could result in an unsafe product. So we don't want to see any products that are open kettle that are fairs. And then next, we just don't want to be too creative with our canning projects. So I know a lot of us have Those multi-cooker pressure cookers at home are Instapots. So again, those are not safe to do any canning with. They haven't been tested. Typically, they maybe get up to the pressure, but they're not. We don't know if they're tested. The inside of the jars are getting up to that higher temperature. So really can't recommend that we're doing any type of the electric pressure canners for any of our 4-H canning projects. All right, and next we have just a little bit about lemon juice and canning tomatoes. So our tomatoes have become less acidic over the years. We like the varieties that aren't quite that acidic. And so what we have to do is we have to add some acid back to make sure that those food products are acidic enough to prevent the growth of botulism. So lemon juice or food grade citric acid or 5% acid vinegar are required as part of the food processing method. And so the USDA canning book is a great resource that talks about why we need to add that extra acid. So this helps make sure that our food product is safe, and if it's left out, it is considered an unsafe processing method and should not be considered a qualified canned food product. So that's pretty important with all of our tomato products. Yes, some of our tomatoes may be acidic enough to prevent the growth of CBOT. We don't know that. So we're just going to assume that they're not, and that we should always add that extra acid. All right, so next, gelatin jams. And so I have seen a few of these. Typically our gelatin jams are refrigerator jams. So usually see the recipe of this is something, if it's made with gelatin as a thickener, then we store it in the refrigerator. However, I have seen a few recipes that call for processing. And generally, most of our recipes and what we would recommend is that people use pectin for that thickener. It's going to be more stable. It's going to have a better quality product. However, if you run across someone that does have a gelatin jam and they followed the correct processing method, it's probably going to be safe. But again, the quality probably and the storage times are probably not going to be good as if they use pectin. So maybe a good suggestion that next time that they use pectin to process their jams or their jellies. And then next we have clear gel. So, you know, as far as extension goes, we don't want to recommend any specific products, but clear gel is one that's the only product out there that does this. So it is a modified starch product that produces excellent sauce consistency even after fillings are canned and baked. So it's basically the thickener for that filling. It will not break down during processing, which would cause a runny filling. So we don't want to see cornstarch or flour. Those are not going to be as safe, and they're not going to have as good a quality either. So clear gel, one that is acceptable to see in our fair projects. All right, so next, just a few things when you're judging in the fair or you're looking at fair exhibits of what we need to include. So this is that basic information that should be included with each project of food preservation that does come to the fair. So we need to make sure that this is all on there. We've also added the addition of a food preservation card. So Amy, if you want to go to the next slide. So we've noticed that some folks don't always have all the correct information. So we've made a little card, and this is available from the State Fair website. I think a lot of our counties are putting on their county website. So 4-Hers can use this instead of writing all that information. Basically, they're filling it, just checking boxes and filling this in. They don't have to use this card as long as they've got all the information there. That's the most important thing. But we're just trying to make it a little bit easier. So want to make sure that they do include the recipe and where they got the recipe. That's still important, and they can put that on the back or on a separate sheet. Either way is fine. So we want to make sure that we do get that card with each product. We also make sure that each jar or each plastic bag of dried food is labeled. So especially at State Fair, a lot of times we have our 3-jar exhibits, and maybe one jar has all the labeling information and the other 2 don't, and one of those jars somehow gets shuffled and it's hard to find its owner. So we do want to make sure that every jar is labeled with the name of the 4-H'er, the county, and the product, and also the date. So that's good for the 4-H'er too, because then they'll know what year they processed it, and we want to make sure that we try and use things up within a year. So just kind of helpful for us to make sure that we don't lose items, but then also to help and make sure that 4-H'er has all the information that you need and our judges need to be able to know if it's a safe product or not. And just a few more things as far as recipes go. Again, it can come from any source, but really does need to follow those current USDA guidelines. And so you've got the USDA canning book. That's a great resource to make sure that they followed those times. There's a few more resources that we have available, which are also good. That are on the next slide. So we do have our new food preservation series curriculums, and I'll talk a little more about that in just a bit. But all those recipes there would be perfectly acceptable. We have the USDA canning guide. That's one that I have on my desk. I use it all the time just to double check times. We have some state extension publications. So if people are searching on the web and this comes from Georgia Extension, should be perfectly fine. This So Easy to Preserve book that's towards the bottom over here, that has a lot more of the unusual recipes, I would say, but it's done by the University of Georgia, and they are really the gurus. They do all the testing at the national level to make sure that those recipes are safe. So if you have someone who's really interested in doing some outside of the box kinds of canning and food preservation, that's a really good resource. And then our ball canning guides, and a lot of people have those. That's at the top there, and that would be perfectly fine also. So as long as it's 1994 editions and beyond. And then as far as, some of our older canning recipes that we might find, that we know if it's older than 1990, it may no longer be safe to use. And so a lot of those, the USDA changed a lot of their canning methods in 1994. So anything older than that really should not be used. So things that are found in church cookbooks or Pinterest or whatever, we just don't know where that may have came from and if those are current or not. So really encourage foragers to be looking for the most current information. And our food.unl.edu website has a lot of great stuff on there too. And again, just to reiterate about altitude. So we do know that most 4-Hers, with the exception of clear on the eastern side, will have to adjust for altitude. So all of our extension publications have a nice little map of Nebraska, and it shows that. So you can find those on the food.unl.edu website. But up to about middle of the state, or right here about in Grand Island, but we go to about 2,000. Technically in Hall County, we're at 1,900 feet. And then go clear over to the western side of Nebraska, and you're getting up to 4,000 or 5,000 feet. So do want to make sure that 4-Hers have that correct information and that they are adjusting for altitude, because it will make a difference how hot their product gets. So we want to make sure that their product is safe no matter where they're canning it at in the state of Nebraska. And I think it is your turn, Amy.
All right, now it's time to talk about our fair exhibits and all of our new curriculum. Ta-da! We have lots to talk about, and it's really exciting what you're going to see this year. First of all, it's a cooking series that goes by numbers, so it's pretty easy. Cooking 101, 201, 301, 401. And Cooking 101 is the very first level that's comparable to 6 Easy Bites. And so this is a county project only. And these are a few of the recommended projects that you might see. And a county can have as many of these as they want, and they might make up a few more, but these are only county-only projects. And so this one might show cookies, muffins. There's a no-bake cookie that's in there, so that'll be fun. And then there's a cereal bar cookie, so that could be something made with Rice Krispies, Cheerios, whatever it might be. Granola bars, brownies, any recipe. And so that's not the brownie sense that we had from before that was comparing 2 different types of brownies. This is just a brownie recipe and a snack mix. So lots and lots of options here. And I can tell you as a foods judge, I'm kind of looking forward to that. And it'll be interesting to see what there is to judge there. And so it's very basic beginning cooking, but then some things that are maybe perhaps they use the microwave or the no-bake cookies. So that should be fun. Cooking 201 is the next level. And what we discovered when we were going through these is that some of the projects that we had at a different level before were in a lower level or vice versa. So you might remember that a quick loaf was actually in about the 3rd level in our previous curriculum, but here we think it's much better placed as it discusses quick breads in Cooking 201. So that was a nice change there. Also in Cooking 201, there's creative mixes. They have biscuits and scones in this level. We're going to go with a healthy baked product that will be in this project. A coffee cake is in here, and this one you would have found before in the fast foods, which is a curriculum that is no longer used this year, but that is in here. But baking with whole grains. So this isn't a yeast bread, this is just baking with whole grains. You might see something like a coffee cake that's made with whole wheat flour, or a cookie that's made with whole wheat flour, something like that. You also might see some more alternative grains here. Perhaps you've got somebody with a gluten intolerance, and they might use a different type of flour that you might see in baking with whole grains. And then the non-traditional baked products. So they bake the item in a different way. Maybe they use their multi-cooker to bake a product in there. Maybe they baked something in a convection oven. But once again, like before, the coffee cake and the non-traditional baked products and a few others do need to have that supporting information, which will be in the Fair Book to remind you when to look for that. Cooking 301 is the third level, and this one would be comparable to You're the Chef, and it has white bread, whole wheat and mixed grain bread, specialty rolls, dinner rolls, and specialty breads. Those are all the same from before, but what's different in 301 is that it actually has a shortened cake. So this would be a very basic type of cake, actually, and so one that's made with a fat. So this is not the angel food type of cake. This would be the other types of cakes that you might see. So this could be quite a tasty change as well. Cooking 401 is the top level, and there were some really fun things to do in this one. We were able to have the double crusted fruit pie in here, able to keep the family food traditions, and so that was our way to look back into our past and our heritages. There's an ethnic food exhibit, so this would be comparable to the cultural food exhibit. And reminder that this is an exhibit and not a display, so we don't want to see the big display boxes with the food in them anymore, but at least at the state fair. And then also they had candy in there, so that could be very interesting for people making candy. And also in Cooking 401, the foam cake is in this one. So your chiffons, your angel food cakes, and really quite honestly, that's a very difficult cake to make, so it really does make sense to have it at the Cooking 401 level. And then the specialty pastry. So you can see that these a few of them change levels a little bit, but for the most part, we're pretty excited about these different options that kids can bring for their baked food exhibits.
All right, and we're also pretty excited about having some food preservation manuals. There's a food preservation series. So we felt like we just really needed to have something that leaders and parents can really refer to make sure that they do have the most correct information. So most of our projects are the same. We do have a few exciting different kinds of things. So the first one is from our freezing, we thought, well, that's not going to really work too well for county fair, but how about if they made a baked item with frozen produce? So for example, if they had peaches and they froze those peaches and they made them into a peach pie, or they have blueberries that they grew at home or could be purchased in the grocery store, they froze them and then made muffins out of them. So wanted to give freezing, kind of a little highlight, so kids have an opportunity to learn how to do that and how easy it is, and then be able to take that product that they've frozen and make it in something that would be an acceptable fair exhibit. So not sure how many we'll see, but we're excited to have that as an option. And then next we have our dried foods, and these are similar to what we've had in the past, our dried fruits, our fruit leather. We did have a vegetable leather, so that can be a combination of fruits and vegetables. We see lots of those products in the stores, kind of like the fruit roll-up, but they've got some vegetables added to it. So we'll see if we get to see any of those, but thought that would be kind of fun. And again, we have our dried vegetables, our dried herbs. And then this is another new one, a baked item made with dried produce or herbs. So it could be a bread made from some dried herbs that the 4-H'er has grown and dried. So we're excited to see what might come from that also. So there are some baked products in our food preservation projects. So we're excited to see those. And then next we have I think it's our boiling water canning. And so these are our fruits, our tomatoes, our pickled, and our jellied items. So not any different than we've had in the past year, or the past many years, but we're excited to have those again. And then the last manual is our pressure canning. And so this one is kind of the more advanced. So we're thinking, you know, freezing is the easiest all the way up to pressure canning, which is going to be the most challenging. And so kids can progress through those. They can also just decide, you know what, I'm just want to start with pressure canning, which is fine too. But these are going to be a little more challenging. Those are going to be our vegetables, our meat, our 3 jars, our quick dinner. So those are basically at least 3 jars of items that someone could make into a quick dinner. So we usually haven't seen a whole lot of those at the fair because it is a lot of work, but I think it's kind of a nice thing to be able to have. I think that would be great to have some quick dinner jars at home to make those quick meals. All right, so that's it for our food preservation projects. Next, we have, just wanted to highlight these. We've had these in the past several years. Just 3 different projects where 4-Hers are able to showcase their skills on food science, physical activity, and nutrition. And so they're able to do some type of poster, a computer-based presentation like a PowerPoint, could be an exhibit display, a written report. So certainly we can allow 4-Hers to be creative, and these may be something that maybe they've done for a science fair at school. So just kind of let them be creative and kind of show us what they've learned. So the first one is the food science, and then the next one is the foods and nutrition one. So kind of basically the same things, just focused more on foods and nutrition. And then the last one is on physical activity. So it's really fun to see these at the state fair, especially kind of see all the different activities that kids are doing and some of the things that they've come up with. So those have been really fun. So if we've got folks who are interested in those, really encourage them to bring those. And then last but not least, we have our Cooking Basics recipe file. So we know that in fast foods and some of our other projects, we've had some recipe files, which we thought was kind of neat to see. So we're just continuing that. So we can have 10 more recipes. So if they have done recipes before in one of the other projects, they can be a continuation of that. Or anybody enrolled in a food project can start and have their first 10 recipes here. So that will be something that we're just continuing from the projects that we've had in the past.
So then this is just a reminder that we so appreciate all of you helping our 4-Hers and judging. And just familiarize yourself with the foods that you are judging. If this is your first time, we have lots of guides and resources, and just want to give you all some tips and some reminders about what to do. So it's important to be informed. You do need to know the basics of a recipe and preparation method. So a cake may have been made from a standard or from a healthier adaptation. How was it mixed? And so the recipe and then the method of mixing can make a difference in the outcome of the product. Like my son called me a couple weeks ago and said he and his friends were cooking and they were trying to make a cake and they dumped everything in there all at once and they wondered if that was going to impact how the cake turned out. So that was a long discussion about, yes, that was, because you can't really mix a cake very well by the big dump method. But the boys assured me it tasted fine. I don't know what it looked like. So also just a reminder that with our kids, sometimes they're in the beginning, sometimes in the middle of the learning process, but this is not a national cooking competition. We're not on TV. It's not worth thousands of dollars. We want excellence rewarded, but we don't want their spirits crushed. So it's just a gentle reminder that you're working with children. And if you have a really extensive background in cooking and baking and food preparation and years of schooling, remember that these kids have maybe just started their baking process. They haven't had 6 to 7 years and 20 years on the job and don't know what you know. So we want to help them learn, but not make them feel bad about what they don't know yet. Judging begins, however, at a red ribbon, although most people don't believe this, and the 4-Hers probably don't believe it, but basically, a red ribbon means the exhibit is average. It's met all of the minimum requirements. It shows that an honest effort has been made, and that while there might be signs of needed improvement, the skill is improving. So the blue ribbon, though, exceeds the minimum standards. The red is really just the minimums. The exhibit might have a few small flaws and it might need some improvement, but it's better than just average. So sometimes I think about if there's 4 cookies and they taste really good, but maybe there's a couple of them that are just a little bit out of shape standard, that might be a blue ribbon. And so just keeping that in mind. A purple ribbon is outstanding and flawless, or there's only very, very small flaws. So that's usually the standard we're looking at when we're looking at ribbon. The most misunderstood ribbon, though, is a white ribbon. A white ribbon means that the exhibit doesn't meet all the minimum standards. It doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile. So when a 4-H'er first sees this ribbon on the exhibit, the first question to ask is, what have I learned and how can I make it better? So no matter what ribbon you put on a project, and we really don't see a lot of white ribbons, but you cannot just put a white or red ribbon on there without explaining why it's there. Our biggest problem I think we've seen in the past is it might get a red or a white ribbon, but there's no explanation as to why it only met the minimum standards or why it didn't meet the standards at all. If you cut into a loaf of quick bread and the middle isn't cooked, then yes, you need to state the middle is not cooked. And then you should write a recommendation on how you can make this better. Maybe it's the size of the pan. Maybe it's how long it was in the oven. But remember that 4-H is a learning experience, and we have to make it a positive one. We so appreciate everything everybody does for all of us with our judging and working with our kids at the state fair and at the county fair level. And we just want to give you a lot of good background so you can have a learning experience as well. Tammy, do you have anything else to add?
I do want to mention that because we do have all new projects, we do have all new score sheets. And so you will need to make sure that you get the latest score sheets off of the State Fair 4-H website and make sure that you get those updated because we do have different projects. I want to make sure we're using the right score sheets. We do even have the score sheets for those county fair projects that we have listed. So if you have your own, something different, you'll have to come up with that, but we do have those available too. So we want to make sure that those are used, and I think that's all I have. So if you would like to unmute yourself, if you have some questions, feel free to ask those, or if you want to type in the chat box, feel free to do that. Or if you just want to email Amy or I with some specific questions, we'd be happy to answer any of those at any time also. So I know there's got to be some questions, comments, so we would love to hear your feedback. I think we put them to sleep, Amy.
We might have. Or we taught them so much they have no questions. Or they won't have a question until it occurs at their fair.
So everybody is on mute. So if you would like to ask a question, please feel free to mute yourself.
Amy and Cami, what is the cost of the materials if a judge I wanted to carry those materials with me?
Oh, you mean the books?
Yes.
I do believe the Cooking 101, 201 is about $40 for all 4 of them. It's on the Shop 4-H website. I can look it up here real quick with the food preservation. I think it's on sale right now.
This would be a good time to remind all of our county staff who may be watching this that especially this year, it's very important to have that curriculum with you at the county fair. And most counties I know do that. They bring out the curriculum, but this year you might want to have a few extra copies or just have that available to your judges because it will be new to everybody. And yes, the cupcake linings are acceptable. Yes, it pertains to muffins.
On the cakes, are they frosted or unfrosted?
They can be frosted as long as they use a safe type of frosting. So they wouldn't want to use like that egg white type of frosting and a cream cheese based frosting. They wouldn't be able to use that. Sugar, when you think about just a basic frosting, there's so much sugar in there that you usually don't see any problems with the bacterial growth in there. So we don't really have that problem. But when you get into those different types of the cream cheese, and then those need to be refrigerated, otherwise they start to taste bad. Let's see. There's another question about the special foods when we talked about gluten-free. A lot of times with the gluten-free, they're going to use a different type of flour. So we've got that, let me see, that slide was clear back in there. I think it was in Cooking 201, where they talked about different types of flour. But also, I think in any of those recipes, as long as if they were making a coffee cake and they were using a different type of flour, you can just state that in the recipe itself. And there's also a few other healthy baked options that are included in, I think it's 201, right, Cami? And then Cami, there's a question here about disqualifying a canning entry that's been processed in an Instapot.
Yes, as far as the Instapot goes, really we just know the testing hasn't been done that it's not safe. So you may want to put a little blurb about that in your 4-H newsletter too, that's saying it does need to be canned in a pressure canner. If there's any way that we can help with that. They make it sound convincing, like it's fine, but we know that the research and the testing has not been done to know that it would be safe.
Okay, there's another question, Cami, that says, what do we do with dried food entries that have a combination of herbs, like Italian seasoning? I'll let you answer that.
I think, and I'll have to reread our fair book, but I think for just the dried herbs, that it's 3 different dried herbs in 3 different bags. If they had with a baked product, using like an Italian seasoning that they have made with different herbs, I would think that would be fine. But I guess what we're looking for is 3 different products in 3 different bags, just because it's really hard to judge if it's all mixed together like that. So, but that's a really good question as to whether that may be, maybe that's something we need to have as a future exhibit. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and then there's another one there that she has as well, and this is a really interesting one, Leah, so I'm glad you asked it. And is there a place for a combination of dried vegetables and herbs like a soup mix? Interesting. That would be a fun exhibit in the future.
That would be. Just back to Deb's question as far as the manuals go. The food preservation manuals are normally $8 a piece. They're on sale for $6 right now. And same with the Cooking 101 series. It's on sale for, I do believe, $30 right now, normally $43. So $32.96. So for those of you, can ask on your local county folks and county folks if you're planning on ordering. It's a good time now because they are on sale. So, okay, what else have we missed, Amy?
Well, we have a question, is cheese that is baked into a product acceptable? If the cheese is baked into like a biscuit and it's a cheese biscuit, then yes, it is. But they cannot melt cheese on the top as on top of like a breadstick. Now, if the cheese is mixed in the dough, it is okay. Does that make sense, Nancy?
And I see that Nancy also asked about how are canning jars identified, and that's a really good question because I did notice, and I think it was Dollar Tree maybe, that they do have canning jars that you can buy, and they are plain. They have nothing on them that has any type of brand or anything like that. And I know we had some discussions last year, and folks thought that people had brought some things in a mayonnaise jar, and I don't think that any mayonnaise is in jars, glass jars anymore. They're all in plastic jars. So as long as it's sealed and it's safe, there's no cracks, we're just going to assume that that's a canning jar unless for some reason you can outrightly tell, but we're hoping that people are canning in canning jars, that they're labeled as canning jars when they purchase them.
And we obviously can't be at every county fair, but if you're judging food preservation at the state fair and you run across these plain jars, just ask us before you disqualify it, and we can look at it with you and determine if it is it'd have to be a really old mayonnaise jar or whatever it might be, versus a different type of non-branded canning jar. But that's a good point, that we really don't see that many glass mayonnaise jars anymore. And if you're still using one, that might be pretty old mayonnaise. We know that you're going to have more questions as you go along. But as our group, between myself, Cammie, Kathy, and Kayla went over the projects, we were just really excited about these new exhibits that you can see at your fairs. And I know that a lot of no-bake bars and protein balls and things like that are really popular these days, and who knows what we're going to see in a few of these project areas. We're excited. So if you're judging, come hungry.
All right, I guess if no one else has any other questions, we will send out this recording. If you have some thoughts afterwards, and feel free to email or call Amy or I. I guess we didn't put our contact information there, Amy, but yeah, we're both just, I'm cammie.wells@unl.edu, and Amy is amy.peterson@unl.edu. So feel free to email us and contact us. Oh, there you go. Amy's got hers in the chat box, and mine too. So, you know, at any time, certainly feel free to contact us. It looks like Deb has in the chat box, what's the definition of healthy foods? And I'm trying to think what exactly the fair book says, Amy. But I think
I'm going to look it up. Hold on.
Okay.
Deb, give just a second, okay?
And that's kind of up to the discretion of yourself. And I know when I have judged some things, and I don't think we've changed it from the past, but I'd have, you know, a 4-H'er say, well, they lowered the salt in the recipe by 1/8 of a teaspoon or something like that. And it's like, well, that's not really that much healthier. And so I did comment about that, about thinking about maybe using applesauce instead of oil, and doing some of those things that will make a healthier product. A little more, a bigger difference than just reducing the salt by just a teeny tiny amount. But I'll wait for Amy to read exactly what we have in the fair book.
Well, I found I'm going to have to stop sharing my screen and I'll look it up. So hold on just a second.
So all of the new fair book information should be listed on the 4-H State Fair section of the website, along with all of the score sheets should be there. Also, that food preservation card is there, so people can have access to that. And certainly if folks want to put that on their local county websites or send that out with their newsletter or put it actually in the fair book, you know, that's great for us. So people have access, but again, if they don't use that specific card, that's fine too, as long as they have that information available for us. So,
okay, so here is the fair book. Let me get rid of the markup. And let's go down here. So the healthy baked product here, the recipe must contain a fruit or vegetable as part of the ingredients, is what the healthy baked product was, like banana bars, cantaloupe quick bread, zucchini muffins. They had examples of this in Cooking 201, and so that's how this got in there. So that's the healthy baked product. And we know that when we add those additional fruits that we're often taking out a little bit of the fat, so it's going to reduce that amount, and a little bit of the sugar sometimes too, just depending on the recipe in itself. And then baking with whole grains, as I was talking about that, because that's a brand new one, whole wheat applesauce bread, peanut butter oatmeal cookies. But once again, if you're using a rice flour or an almond flour, or like we were trying to figure out where all those things could go, but we also didn't, we were perfectly fine if you wanted to make a loaf of quick bread with an alternative type of flour. You can always just enter it that way. But I would be very specific to that 4-H'er on their supporting information that they should include that I'm a child who's allergic to this, so I made this product with this type of flour. Cammie, do you have anything else to add about that?
no, I don't. I'm glad you looked that up, because obviously I had completely forgotten about that fruit or vegetable part. So that was very good. And Leah also commented about drying canned fruit. So typically sees entries of drying pineapple from canned fruit. And I don't think we have anything that says it has to be fresh fruit.
No, it doesn't have to be fresh fruit, no.
Yeah.
And that's not any different than sometimes we see people that are canning big baby carrots. And why, I don't know, but it's okay. I mean, the point is to learn how to process them correctly.
Mm-hmm.
But back to food allergies and things, it almost seems better that we don't have a specific exhibit related to a specific type of flour, whatever it might be, because it might be in any level, 101 up to 401, if you have a child who's dealing with needing something that was lower in sugar or using a different type of flour. So I would have them make whatever it was they're going to make, and then note on their recipe what type of different product they used and why they used it. Then they don't have to worry about it all the way through their 4-H food projects. Does that make sense?
I think that's a good point, Amy, because we want them to progress through these food projects, you know, starting out when they're littler at that 101 and then progressing. And if they do have those alternative dietary needs, that they'd be able to have a product, you know, all throughout those levels.
A few more things, since I know we still have some people on here just wondering about some different things that are in the Fair Book. When we talked about the shortened cake, there's a little bit more here about that. And the cake may be frosted with a non-perishable frosting, because I know that one of you had a question about that. And the candy, as again, that was a different type of thing. This would not be like a cream cheese mint. So, and with the criteria we used there was, they talked about making candy in this book, and then I also checked with a few others. There's only a couple of other, maybe one other state in the United States that had candy as a 4-H food exhibit, and these were some criteria that they followed. So we felt comfortable that another state had already done the research as to what's appropriate and did follow their guidelines. Are there any other questions? If not, as you roll along with your 4-H fun this summer, I'm sure that, yes, the food manuals are available now. Cammie, do you want to type in the address where they can purchase them at?
I can do that. So it's just shop4h.org, 4-h.org, and then you can search by curriculum, and then it's just under healthy lifestyles. So all of those were there. There is not a leader's guide that goes with the food preservation, but there is kind of a helper's guide that goes with the Cooking 101 through Cooking 401 series, and that's kind of nice information to have too. All right, so if there's nothing else, again, please let Amy or I know if you have questions or comments or have any suggestions for us in the future. It seems like we always make some changes every year. This is a big one. So, you know, we're expecting we'll probably need to make some revisions depending on how this upcoming season goes. So just please let us know your feedback. We really appreciate it, and thanks for joining today.